in the last 3 chapters, Charlotte Bronte has depicted the reconciliation between Jane Eyre and Rochester. That is how these two persons are reconciled, on what grounds they are reconciled. And if you think of the incident of reconciliation, you may call this incident a melodramatic incident. So why should we call it a melodramatic incident? I like to explain it. Then another important event that you have to know, that it is said that this is a feminist novel. Undoubtedly, it's a feminist novel because in feminism, it is said that a woman should have equal rights of a man. Now, on what ground does Jane Eyre meet Rochester or marry Rochester? This is said that she meets Rochester or she marries Rochester on equal ground. Now, how can you call it equality? This is another important thing that you have to critically analyze. Another important incident that I like to mention here, that this novel has got some Gothic elements, supernatural elements. Now, what are these supernatural elements and how these supernatural elements influence the major action of this novel? So these are the 3 questions that I like to ask, and you have to critically answer to these questions. Number 1, in chapter 6, we find that Jane Eyre lives in the Moor House, which is a far away place from Thornfield. Thornfield is the place, is the living place, is the area where Rochester lives. Okay. And we know that 1 year ago, Jane Eyre left the house of Rochester Stilton. That is, without informing anybody, she left the house of Rochester. And then we knew from the narrative that Rochester was a married person. He had a wife, his wife's name was Martha Mason. So, in a very precarious or miserable situation, Jane Eyre left the house of Rochester and went to the Moor House, that is a neighboring region. And there she took the job of a school teacher and she earned solvency. She became a self reliant girl. So it's a very important incident. That is, this very departure or leaving of the house of Rochester and going to the Moor House, living there for 1 year, doing the job of a school teacher, proved that she was struggling to achieve the status of equality. So it's a very dramatic incident, and this very incident is purposeful. So very tactfully, the authoress takes this character out of the influence of a man, that is Rochester, and she is thrown into a canvas where she fights alone, though she is helped by her cousin Saint John, who also proposes to her to marry her. But the struggle that she makes is absolutely her own. And that very struggle brings out her ability. And it also proves her to be competent enough to survive in this society by virtue of her own uh, ability or own competence. So the 1 year period that she spent in Moor House is dramatically very important because this very space of time or span of time provides Jane Eyre with sufficient opportunities to prove her ability, to prove her worth, and to become self reliant. So remember this, it's a very important technique. I call it technique because this very strategy adopted by this authoress has helped her female protagonists to be financially, socially, and economically self-reliant. Okay. Now, another important incident that I have already mentioned, that we find the reflection of Gothic element here. Gothic means ghost, ghostly element. You know that in English culture we find Gothic elements. So why? If you think of the origin of the English or the Britons, you will find that the Britons were originally pagans. The Britons were originally pagans. They believed in different spirits, gods and goddesses. They also believed in supernatural power, existence of the spirits of their ancestors. They also believed that the spirits of their ancestors could guide them and could misguide them. So all these were the ingredients of their pagan attitude towards life. If you think of the Vikings who came from the north to different areas of Britain, those Vikings were also pagans. They believed in spirits, they believed in invisible gods and goddesses, they also believed in different forces of the nature. And ultimately, many Vikings or Northmen settled in Britain and there was a hybridization. Okay. Or if you think of the Irish people, they believed in Celticism. They were also fond of supernatural elements. And so far, I believe you studied Riders to the Sea. And in Riders to the Sea, you will find some Gothic elements there. Moria, the aged woman, believed in the role of different factors which are invisible and which are invulnerable. Okay, so just think of these factors. If you think of these factors, then you can easily understand how the English were uh, fond of supernatural elements. And we find these elements, a reflection of these elements in different writings of English literature. And this text is also not an exception because here, towards the beginning of this text, we find that Jane Eyre was locked up in a room where Mr. Reed died, and she seemed to see the ghost of her uncle. So that was a Gothic element. Now, here in this chapter, chapter 36, we will find an example of another Gothic element or Gothic incident also. So, where's that Gothic element? In chapter 36, we will find that Jane Eyre one night uh, seemed to hear the voice of Rochester, most probably in her dream, or actually, she could not believe whether it was her dream or not, or reality. Actually, she heard the voice of Rochester. That is, Rochester was calling her by her name. Now, how is it possible? Rochester lives in Thornfield. It's a far away region. And Jane Eyre lives in Moor House. This is also a far away region. And there is a good distance between these two places. So, how can Jane Eyre hear the voice of Rochester one night. So anyway, Jane Eyre told that she heard the voice of Rochester one night. And then she became anxious about Rochester. She thought that something ominous might have happened with Rochester. So the next morning, she started for Thornfield. Okay. And Saint John, that is her uncle, who proposed to her to marry her, was not ready to let her go, but Jane Eyre did not listen to him. Understand? Jane Eyre did not listen to him. Jane Eyre went to Thornfield, and there she got down from the chariot, that is from the horse cart, in front of the house of Rochester, and she was astonished to see the wreckage, the remainings of the house of Rochester. Rochester's house was burned into ashes. It was only a heap of wreckage. Okay. So Jane Eyre was astonished to see such a transformation or such a change, dramatic change. Then she started a search for Rochester. What happened to him? Ultimately, she found that Rochester was living with two of his previous servants. So Jane Eyre met Rochester, and she was astonished to see the dramatic change of Rochester. Rochester was blind. He lost also one of his hands. So how he came to know from Rochester's narrative that one night, out of madness or out of frenzy, Bertha Mason, that is Rochester's wife, set the house ablaze, that is, set the house on fire. Okay, so the house was burnt into ashes, and Rochester tried his best to save the life of his wife, but unfortunately he could not. Bertha was at the roof of the house, and she was surrounded by the hungry flames of fire. So, out of desperation, she jumped into the fire. She jumped down into the fire and she died. Rochester tried his best to save her, to rescue her, but he could not. Rather, he lost one of his hands and he lost his eyesight. So, that very shocking story astonished Jane Eyre. She was really shocked. Okay. So, while she found that Rochester was in a very precarious situation, or Rochester was in a miserable situation, then uh, then Jane Eyre grew love for Rochester, and she felt interested in Rochester, or she decided to marry Rochester. Okay. And one day, while Rochester and Jane Eyre was walking in the evening outside, Rochester told Jane Eyre that a few days ago, at night, he was calling the name of Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre was astonished because she heard the shout or the name. She heard her name from the lips of Rochester. Anyway, she could not reveal it. So, how is it possible? Actually, this is a Gothic element. You cannot scientifically explain it, or you cannot satisfactorily give sufficient evidences in favor of this incident, in favor of the authenticity of this incident. This is called a supernatural element. That is, Rochester told Jane Eyre that a few days ago at night he called Jane Eyre's name several times. And why did Jane Eyre come to meet Rochester? A few days ago, one night, Jane Eyre seemed to hear her name from the lips of Rochester. So just think of this incident. Is it possible in reality? It is not possible in reality. Suppose you live in Dhaka and your husband lives in Dubai, and from there he is calling your name, not through cell phone or not through other social media, only uttering your name through his lips. Is it possible to hear? Not possible. Scientifically not possible. You may say that I hear him emotionally in the core of my heart. All these are very emotional words, but in reality, it is not possible. But Jane Eyre is astonished while Rochester informs her that a few days ago at night he calls Jane Eyre's name several times. And Jane Eyre also heard her names, from the lips of Rochester a few days ago. So, how is it possible? Actually, this mysterious incident is incorporated into this chapter, chapter 36, to create a dramatic atmosphere or to create a, a very mysterious atmosphere. So, thus, we find that a kind of parallelism or juxtaposition between reality and unreality, that is, reality and supernaturalism, um, is incorporated into this text. This very parallelism between reality and unreality creates an atmosphere of mystery. It creates suspense. So, why is it done? You may question. You know that this is a vast text, voluminous text, and this text covers more than 500 pages. And it is very, very difficult to catch hold of the attention or concentration of the readers with such a vast text. It is very difficult to, it is very, very difficult to uh, sustain the attention of the readers with such a vast text. Okay, so you may call it a technique to sustain the attention or concentration, attraction of the readers. So it is done with a purpose. So what's the purpose of the writer? The purpose of the writer is to catch the concentration of the reader's hold. And especially we find this technique deployed by the writers of voluminous texts. It's a narrative text, and it is the story of ups and downs of Jane Eyre's life. It is the story of vicissitudes of a Victorian woman, a Victorian girl turning into a woman. Now, this very turning or this very transformation requires a lot of struggles, a lot of uh, experiences. And all these troubles and experiences are narrated here. And the readers may feel bored. So, to sustain their attention, this technique is incorporated here. And if you think of the anthropologically, if you think or if you analyze this very particular incident from the British cultural perspective, you may find that the British people even today believe in different supernatural elements. Or even today, the ghost series or ghost films are very popular, and Hollywood makes or produces ghost films frequently, and this very institution earns a lot of money all over the world. And even today, the English people or the Europeans or the Americans can identify ghosts in their CCTV camera, that is closed circuit camera. They discover the shadow of ghosts, the shadow of spirits. So why? Because the spirit is still living in the core of their hearts. Because in the past, if you go back to the Anglo-Saxon period, you will find that most of them were pagans. Christianity came to England towards the end of 5th century. But till 5th century, till the end of 5th century, the Britons were mostly pagans. So this supernatural element is an ingredient of their pagan belief. And it has become an inevitable part of many of the writings of English literature. You will find these pagan elements even in the belief system of different important personalities or politically important personalities of England. James I, who came to power of England in 1603, believed in witchcraft. He believed in witchcraft and black art of necromancy. And Shakespeare, to cater to the taste of Elizabethan audience, incorporated supernatural elements in some of his dramas. We know it. So anyway, this text is not an exception, I have already said. So anyway, while Jane Eyre found that Rochester was in a miserable situation and Rochester was blind, he lost one of his hands. In such a critical phase of the life of Rochester, Jane Eyre became an equal to Rochester. That is called equality. Now Rochester is dependent on Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is no more dependent on Rochester. So why? Because Rochester is blind. He lost one of his hands. He lost his ability to earn. So now he has become a burden or totally dependent. On whom? On Jane Eyre. In patriarchal society, a woman is usually depicted as dependent on a man. A wife is usually depicted as dependent on her husband. The husband is the only income generating person in the family. He earns money, and for that reason, he exercises power upon the female members of the family. So earning means making money. This very ability empowers a man. Understand? Making money empowers a man. So the empowerment requires your economic ability. If you want to empower yourself, you must achieve your economic ability. You have to earn money. If you can earn money or if you can achieve this economic ability, then you can empower yourself. You will be able to participate in different activities of decision making. Otherwise, you will not be invited to offer your views or arguments in decision making. Understand? So now we find that Rochester is not an income generating person. On the other hand, Jane Eyre is an income generating person. During this span of 1 year, while she was living in Moorhouse, she earned sufficient money. She has got a social status as a teacher. She has also deserved dignity and honor in the society. That is, she is socially established. Now she, in this regard, is equal to Rochester, that is a male member of patriarchal society. This is called equal ground. So on this equal ground, Jane Eyre decided to marry Rochester. All right. And in the last chapter, that is in chapter 38, you will find that Jane Eyre married Rochester. Okay. Jane Eyre married Rochester. And only the parson was the evidence there. So Jane Eyre did not depend on the society absolutely to have recognition or acknowledgement. This is another important incident. Just keep it in mind that in our society, what do we find, especially in the occasion or on the occasion of marriage ceremony? While you will marry, your father will invite your neighbors. So why? Because the neighbors will give the acknowledgement that the man whom you marry and the man who marries you, these two persons will live together and nobody will complain. This is called social recognition. They will not complain, they will not scandalize your relationship. This is called social recognition. So we are dependent on the society for acknowledgement. But here, towards the end of this novel, we find that Jane Eyre's dependence on the society is not inevitable. So why? Because she is now an income generating person. She is now an income generating person that has empowered her. So one thing that you must not forget, that empowerment requires your economic ability. If you can have your economic ability, if you can earn money, or if you can be self-reliant, or if you can meet up your own necessities, then you will be able to exercise your arguments, exercise your decisions, or you can also make the society listen to you. The society will not listen to you unless and until you enter into the mainstream of economy. However beautiful you may be, the people will say you are beautiful, but not socially, economically useful. Just think of this term, beautiful and useful. You are beautiful, all right, but you are not useful for the society. So why? Because you are not income generating personality. The society is just like a vehicle. It is running all the time. It is running and running and running. And what's your duty? Your duty is to keep the wheels of this vehicle moving or running. If you can keep the wheels of this vehicle running, then you will be considered to be useful. Otherwise, not. So, in this respect, we find that Jane Eyre ultimately proves herself to be useful to the society. Okay, in the past, she was beautiful. Rochester once proposed to marry Jane Eyre. So why? Because Jane Eyre was beautiful at that time. Now, Jane Eyre has become useful to the society, to Rochester. This is called transformation. This is called metamorphosis. That is, this is also called paradigm shift of your condition. You have your condition. You are now jobless. You are now dependent on your parents. You are now dependent on the society for acknowledgement, for recognition. You are now dependent on different social institutions, political institutions, state institutions. But if you can prove your worth, and if you can prove that you have participation in the mainstream of economy, then you will be considered to be useful. And then society will listen to you, otherwise not. This is called transformation. So if you can attain this transformation, or if you can go through this transformation process and attain your position that deserves respect, that deserves dignity, that deserves acknowledgement of the society, then you will be able to prove or to uh, declare your entity as an inevitable part of the society. And that has been done, that has been accomplished by Jane Eyre ultimately in this text. Actually, this is the reason for which we call it a feminist text. It's a feminist text because the protagonist is a woman, number one. Number two, it shows the struggle of a woman to be equal to a man. Feminism wants what? Feminism wants that a woman should have equal rights of a man. And here we find the same thing accomplished by Jane Eyre. For that reason, we may call it a feminist text. Understand? Anyway, towards the end of this text, we find that uh, Jane Eyre married Rochester, and after 1 year, Rochester was gradually getting his eyesight back, and he is becoming a bit healthy, a bit sane, and he is recovering in course of time. So this is an optimistic aura. This is an optimistic air that has been given towards the end of this text. Optimistic aura has been given here. So Rochester's recovery, or Rochester's improvement of his condition, shows that we have still hope, or Jane Eyre is still in the right track. She has not uh, she has not showed her 100% dedication or 100% subjugation to the male dominated society. A woman is struggling to be equal to man. A man is trying to sustain his own status in the society. So a society is a harmonious society, while the society is defined in respect of equal attitude towards both man and woman. If men and women are equally treated in the society, then the society is called a harmonious society. Okay, actually, this is the message that has been given into this text. This is the message. All right. So, society does never advocate the message that a woman should be self-reliant and a man should be dependent on women. This is not the advocacy of a harmonious society. Jane Eyre married Rochester while Rochester was dependent on him, on her. And at the same time, uh, an indication is also given here in this text that Rochester is also trying to recover. So Rochester, in course of time, will remain no more dependent on Jane Eyre. So they will live on the equal platform of life. There will be equality, there will be harmony, or there will be a good, a harmonious synthesis between a man and a woman. And if this harmonious synthesis can be ensured in a society, that very society will last long. That very society may be termed as an ideal society. And that very society will not be oppressive to the women, because both men and women will live on the platform of equality. Actually, that is the message that has been incorporated into this text. Okay.